Welcome to Oxford Online English. Where do you live? Do you live in a small town, a big city, or a remote village? What's it like? In this lesson, you can learn how to describe your hometown in English. Let's start with some basic English vocabulary you can use to talk about your hometown. Part 1. Introducing your hometown. Let's start with a simple sentence. I live in a... What could you say? You could say something like, I live in a city. I live in a town. I live in a village. That's a good start, but it's very basic. Let's add a bit more detail. What's it called? How big is it? I live in Paris. It's the capital city. I live in Shanghai. It's a huge city. I live in a small town. It's called Banbury. I live in Manarola, which is a tiny village by the sea. Better. You should always try to add more details when you speak. What about you? Where do you live? Can you make 1 or 2 sentences like this? Pause the video and practice. Okay, let's move on. We need to make our answers more detailed and interesting. Part 2. Adding background and details. Think about these questions. What's your hometown famous for? Can you think of some words you could use to describe your hometown? How long have you lived there? Add these ideas to your answer to make it longer and more detailed. For example, I live in Paris. It's the capital city. It's famous for its landmarks, such as the Eiffel Tower, Notre Dame Cathedral, or the Louvre. It's also well known for its food, of course. I live in Shanghai. It's a huge, bustling, international city. People from all over the world live and work there. I live in a small town called Banbury. I've been living there for about 5 years, since I finished university. It's a pretty sleepy place, to be honest. Let's look at some useful vocabulary from these examples, which you can use when you speak. We said, Paris is famous for its landmarks, such as the Eiffel Tower. Landmarks are famous places or buildings like the Eiffel Tower in Paris, the Sydney Opera House, or Christ the Redeemer in Rio. Does your hometown have any famous landmarks? What are they called in English? Next, we said, Shanghai is a bustling city. Do you know what this means? It means there's a lot of activity. There are lots of people, lots of traffic, lots of life and energy. Is your city bustling or sleepy? If a town is sleepy, there's not much activity and things are quiet. What about your hometown? Look at our questions again. What's your hometown famous for? Can you think of some words you could use to describe your hometown? How long have you lived there? What could you say about your hometown? Pause the video and try to make 2 to 3 sentences. Okay? Let's look at our next point. Part 3. Saying what you like about your hometown. What's good about your hometown? What do you like most about it? Different people like different things in a city or town. Let's look at some example sentences which express positive feelings. I love living in Paris. It's got such a rich culture, and there's always something interesting going on. Shanghai's a great place to live. It's a real 24-hour city, and you can meet people from all over the world. Living in Banbury suits me. It's a quiet place, and it's small enough that you can get to know your neighbors and have a sense of community. What's important for you? Do you want to live somewhere with a rich culture and a sense of history? Or do you prefer more modern, international cities? Would you rather live somewhere larger and more energetic, or somewhere smaller and more peaceful? Think about these ideas. You'll need them in a minute. Let's look at some useful language from our examples. I love living in is a great place to live. Living in suits me. Of course, you can change these to say what you want to. I quite like living in. I really like living in. I suppose I don't mind living in. We also saw some useful phrases in our examples. It's got such a rich culture. There's always something interesting going on. It's a real 24-hour city. You can meet people from all over the world. It's small enough that you can get to know your neighbors. You have a sense of community. What does that last phrase mean? If you have a sense of community, it means people know their neighbors and feel like they belong to a wider community. Smaller towns and villages often have a better sense of community. Perhaps because people have more time to talk to each other and do things together. What about your hometown? Could you use any of these phrases to describe where you live? Next, what if you don't like something about your hometown? Part 4. Saying what you dislike. Let's look at some examples which express negative feelings. Paris is great, but the cost of living is really high. That can be quite stressful because you're always thinking about money and how to make ends meet. Shanghai's an exciting place, but it's really crowded and it can be exhausting to live there. Air quality can be an issue, particularly in the summer.
In today's competitive business environment, it's often not enough just to have an undergraduate degree if you're aiming for the top. Many students tell us that their dream job often requires them to continue their studies and complete a postgraduate degree course, showing commitment to their future and gaining the...
Banbury's nice, but sometimes I find it a bit boring. there's not much nightlife, and sometimes it feels a bit cut off from the wider world. When talking about things you don't like about your hometown, you can use adjectives like stressful, crowded, boring. You can make your answer more interesting by using phrases. We saw some useful ones in our examples. The cost of living is really high. You're always thinking about how to make ends meet. Meaning, you're always thinking about how to pay for your basic living costs. It can be exhausting to live there. Air quality can be an issue. There's not much nightlife. It feels a bit cut off from the wider world. Meaning, you feel like you're far away from people, culture, and activity. Could you use any of these phrases to describe your hometown? Remember that you can also change the phrases to fit your ideas. For example, traffic can be an issue. There's not much for young people to do. It can be very stressful to live here. Okay, what about you? Try to make 3 to 4 sentences. Say what you like and dislike about your hometown. Use the key words and phrases from parts 3 and 4. Go on, pause the video, and practice. Okay, we have one more thing to do. Part 5, describing how it's changed over time. What was your hometown like 10, 20, or 50 years ago? How has it changed? How has it changed over time? Some places change very fast. Other places never seem to change at all. Talking about changes can add interesting and useful information to your description. Let's look. Paris has changed a lot in the last 20 years. It's much more international and much more expensive than it used to be. However, the soul of the city is still there. Paris will always be Paris. Shanghai is almost unrecognizable compared to 20 or 30 years ago. The city has expanded so much, both physically and economically. It's amazing when you see old photos of the city. Things are so different now. Banbury hasn't changed much as a place in the last 20 years. But the mix of people is a bit different nowadays. The population used to be older and mostly English, whereas now there are more young people living here, including many people from other parts of Europe. Again, these examples contain a lot of useful language you can use to talk about your hometown. For example, has changed a lot in the last 20 years. Is almost unrecognizable compared to 20 years ago. Hasn't changed much as a place in the last 20 years. Which of these sentences is true for your hometown? Can you add details to explain why? For example, it's much more than it used to be. The city has so much. The is a bit different nowadays.
Why do students choose to study at BSBI? Perhaps it's because we offer quality education at an affordable cost. Or maybe it's because all our programs are taught in English from our central Berlin campus. It could even be our dynamic curriculum, which has been designed to challenge your understanding, develop your talent and inspire your ideas, taking your learning beyond business. Whatever the reason, we are proud to offer an excellent study experience in Germany's cosmopolitan capital, a city famous for its booming economy, multicultural flair and thriving.
Now,